Original and at one time popular, but soon squandered its beauty on young and inept riders. As a result, almost extinct. It should be recalled that Japanese companies have always interpreted this type of body in their own way. Well, the B-pillar-less coupe they've been churning out since the 60s is clear. Why fence a support with a single huge door and a small rear window? However, four-door bodies have always been cautious. This title was called, in fact, they just amputated the frames at the window panes. However, with the Carina ED, which appeared in 1985, Toyota decided on more. On a clean, like the Americans, hardtop, where the central crossbar is cut off along the windowsill line. No wonder the abbreviation ED stands for exciting, dressy, exciting, fashionable. It would seem that only smooth lines and flat surfaces, but what a swift, somewhat even aggressive look. It is significant that in order to obtain it, Toyota significantly reshaped the power structure of the base Carina of the 1984 model. They lengthened the wheelbase by 10 millimeters, made the new body wider and at the same time 45 millimeters lower. A sort of factory-style chop top, which gave birth to this memorable image against the background of a total length that has increased by 150 millimeters. And if you lower all the windows, suspension, the chassis, unlike the body, did not carry revelations, McPherson front and rear, as on co-platforms. Another thing is that the front-wheel drive itself in the mid-80s was perceived as something fresh. Engine. Moreover, along with the change in layout, Toyota in this segment resolutely abandoned the old gasoline engines of the R, T, Y series. They were replaced by engines of the A and S lines. Carina ED, as the flagship of the family, received only the latter, namely, the 1.8-liter 1S in two versions, ILU and ELU. Both units were 8-valve, but the first with central injection, 105 horsepower. The second, with distributed, which is why the power has increased to 115 forces. Not too much for a car with this appearance. Therefore, the 2.0-liter 3S Jella, the first generation of the famous aspirated 3S GE, had to satisfy drivers' ambitions. Wide head, 16 valves, 160 forces. For less than 1,200 kilograms, it is already quite enough. By the way, Corona/Carina sedans weighed in the region of a ton, which undoubtedly indicates a significant strengthening of the supporting structures of the hardtop. In addition, unlike family models, the automatic on the Carina ED also offered mechanics, always had 4 gears. Here 4WD and 4WS then, alas, were not supposed to. Equipment. But the car was richly equipped. Full power accessories, acoustics with radio and rear window heating, steering wheel adjustment in 2 planes, sunroof. As an alternative to the analog, an electronic instrument cluster was offered. For a surcharge, an anti-wing on the trunk lid and cruise control. Even the front seats existed in 2 forms, civilian and sports, with pronounced lateral support. However, the Carina ED Salon is better to study on a concrete living example. And the first thing you pay attention to is that Carina ED has no chips inherent only to it on the front panel. Is that climate control is also present in the instrument cluster, and extended, with a hint of hard operation, toolkit. But if you take a look at the entire cabin, unusual, for example, are the internal levers of the doors, hiding in the pockets of the armrests. Salon. The driver's seat, as if from some spa. So many adjustments. And what? They mentioned an unusually large range of longitudinal movements. And here is the height. The backrest does not just lean back, you can steplessly adjust the angle of its inclination. And what is quite surprising is to change the lumbar support and the density of coverage of the back with lateral support rollers, for which electric drives are responsible. As for the rear seats, I had to hear the following opinion. Say, in Corona/Carina it was freer, but in the 2 doors from the family, of course, it was closer. But what about the 10 millimeters increase in the wheelbase? No, ED is quite loyal to the rear passengers. It doesn't press on the knees, it doesn't press on the shoulders. But only to 2. The third, middle one, if he enters, he will not be particularly happy. But the trunk is hardtop, it seems, has never seen a mother-in-law with seedlings in Russia. He drove boys and received appropriate service. Unless, of course, he lived to such, having passed all the pillars and ditches. In other words, the year went for 2, or even more. If the units were at least 3 times resourceful, could they endure such an operating mode? So to find a living, well-groomed and stock dressy, even within the whole country, is hardly a feasible task. Until now, they simply did not survive. In our case, the atmospheric Jello has long been scrapped, giving way to the Turbo 3S GTE from the 185th Celica, and even that went through a rebuild. 225 forces, mechanics, torsion self-block. As they say, if there was no such modification, it had to be invented. The chassis has also been revised. Out back are more powerful disc brakes from Exif, and up front are two-piston calipers from Caldina GTT, single-tube shock absorbers, rubber 17th, although it was installed regularly with a bore diameter of 13 and 14 inches. But, perhaps, it is on the Carina ED that such shoes sit organically. This reincarnation of the car is crowned with the forked exhaust. Of course, with such an upgrade, it is impossible to evaluate how it was driving, being in the factory version. On the other hand, the 3S GTE itself is already a motor youngtimer. And I am glad to feel again this, if not great, but pure power. It's a paradox of the helping systems in it, only TVIS, change in intake track geometry. But how pleasant this is even in urban use. Before the boost reaches operating pressure, under the hood is a conventional 2.0-liter engine capable of pulling in third gear from 1,000 revolutions. And in general, you can safely make mistakes in choosing the steps. It forgives the fourth instead of the second. When the turbine starts to blow, you know the horses in the 3S GTE are not God knows how many. Not JZ GTE for sure. So after all, Carina ED weighs not like Mark II and the like. Therefore, you can and should count on active, taking into account the self-blocking starts and on intensive subsequent acceleration, which is facilitated by a good selection of gear ratios and a shortened lever link. The only thing missing is 4WD, the weight distribution of the hardtop. Just front-wheel drive and too much gas make the drive wheels desperately slip. Powerful brakes are quite appropriate here. But not everyone will like the stiffer suspension. Low-profile tires on a large rim plus single-tube shock absorbers. Of course, such a configuration for a turbo engine suggests itself. Just remember that the standard size with atmospheric Jello was 195/60 R14, and the Celica, which got the GTE, has a little more, 215/50 R15. Moreover, in the case of the Carina ED, so to speak, there is no margin, like the same mark or crown, in terms of smoothness. Hard lay. That a body without a central pillar digests already poorly, grunts. I would, frankly, switch to two pipes and a high profile with some kind of soft rubber. Let the steering wheel lose its current clarity. But the car, along with explosive dynamics, will gain comfort.